Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Along Came a Writer Network. Opinions expressed in our shows do not necessarily reflect those of the network. Welcome to the Along Came a Writer Show. I'm your host, Linda Kozar, a multi-published author who interviews fellow authors and other fascinating folks. My website is lindakozar.com, and I hope you'll find me on social media. Today our guest is Rachel Dodge, author of the Anne of Green Gables Devotional. First, I'd like to introduce my guest. Rachel Dodge is the author of Praying with Jane, 31 Days Through the Prayers of Jane Austen, and the Anne of Green Gables Devotional, a chapter-by-chapter companion for Kindred Spirits. She teaches college English classes, gives talks at libraries, teas, and book clubs, and is a writer for the popular Jane Austen's World blog and Jane Austen's Regency World magazine. She's passionate about encouraging and equipping families to grow closer to Jesus through prayer and the study of God's Word. A kindred spirit at heart, Dodge enjoys books, bonnets, and ball gowns. She makes her home in California with her husband and their 2 children. More information can be found at racheldodge.com. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Linda, for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure. And, you know, I wanted to read, let's see, you have a wonderful endorsement. Okay, this endorsement is from Robin Jones Gunn, author of the Haven Maker series and the Christy Miller series. She said about the book, "This book is a treasure. I loved it. Rachel took some of our favorite moments in the classic Anne stories and infused them with deeper insights by pairing them with scripture. If this charmer of a devotion were a dress, it would have puffed sleeves, the puffiest." That's just great. I love it. Probably my favorite one. Okay, so thanks for joining us today. And now that we know a little bit about you, tell us about your latest book, The Anne of Green Gables.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful process. It's coming out November 1st, and it was such a fun process to write it and to dream it up. I mean, I wouldn't say I dreamed it up. I know the Lord placed the idea in my heart and my head probably years ago, but this last couple years, he just kept prompting me, and it's just been such a neat journey to take a story that I grew up with and have loved my whole life, probably one of my most favorite books that I've read over and over and over, even as an adult, you know, just as a comfort read, to go through and now look at the spiritual lessons has just been eye-opening and so satisfying. The book has 40 devotionals, so it has one devotional per chapter of the book. So you can essentially read a chapter of Anne's story and then read a corresponding devotional entry. And, you know, I go through and take one lesson from that chapter of Anne's story and make spiritual application. We have, there's key Bible verses and a sample prayer for the day and personal application. And so you can read some of Anne's story and then glean what God would have for us from her story and apply it to our story.
How did you choose? I mean, there's probably so many ways you could have gone for a devotion for each of those chapters. I bet it was hard to choose at times.
It was, yeah. It was an interesting process because there were some chapters when I would get there and I would just think every bit of this chapter is so good. What's the one thing that I can take out of this? And this the process of writing this devotional was a little different than some of the other writing that I've done. Most of the time I sit at the computer. I might draft a bit on paper, but usually I'm at the computer for most of my writing process. And for this one, I actually sat with the book and with my Bible and a journal, and I journaled each devotional just as though I were sitting down with the Lord and saying, what would you have me learn out of this? And so I would do one chapter at a time. And when I sat down and would read through the chapter of Anne of Green Gables, and I would read, say chapter 2 and read through it. And almost every time though, there would be something as I prayed that there would just be something that really stood out, almost felt like it was highlighted, it would just pop out at me. And I would know that's the one thing to focus on this time.
That's awesome. And, I love the fact that it's 40, because that's such a biblical number, isn't it?
It is.
Things after 40 days, right?
Exactly. And the book itself, Anne of Green Gables, is actually 38 chapters long, but I like even numbers, and I love, like you said, the biblical context of 40 days. And so the last 2 chapters are kind of bonus chapters, and one is on reconciliation, and it has an invitation included in it for those who might be reading through the book and haven't ever really given their lives to Christ, or maybe they are seeking some kind of recommitment with the Lord, or just going through a really difficult time and want to recommit to prayer, or, anything like that. And then the 40th chapter is actually the story of how Anne of Green Gables came to be, how Lucy Maud Montgomery wrote the book, and an encouragement to us that God is still writing our stories. And it sometimes starts like Lucy Maud Montgomery, started with just 2 lines or 1 line on a slip of paper, and later became, this worldwide sensation. So we can apply that to our lives as well.
Oh, yes. Some stories start on gift wrappers. You just never know. But, and then, people can also use this together, using this for a 40-day Bible study. Because do you have questions in it? Or, so
at the end of the book, I do have discussion questions. So you could sit and read through the book with a friend, or you could meet up in a group. So I tried to design it so that women or families or whoever wants to get together to read it, my family, we love reading books out loud, and we love I like the idea, my kids love the idea when we read a book out loud, then we talk about the lessons at the end of the chapter most of the time anyway. So you can do that. And we love doing family devotions out loud. So, families could do it, or a group of ladies if you want to get together and go through it. And so there's discussion questions per chapter at the end that are set up for small groups. And then there's also a glossary at the end that's just a whole collection of Anne's best quotes, because she had so many.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask you. Well, yeah, I was going to ask you about The World According to Anne Shirley, the glossary you've got at the end. That's a bonus, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's a really fun bonus. And it's kind of all of Anne's most memorable sayings. I broke them down by category. So, she has a lot of mishaps in the kitchen. So there's one category just on all the things she has to say about cooking and food. There's some that are, just on topics like dressing and fashion and beauty and things like that, red hair, but also really sweet things that she talks about, like, best friends and faith and prayer and things like that. So it's really neat because, within the actual devotional entries, I couldn't include everything. So the glossary was kind of my way of taking all those other goodies and still getting them in the book for my readers.
That's wonderful. And for anybody who's a fan of Anne of Green Gables, that would be such a great bonus alongside with the Bible study. And, I was going to mention earlier that working with a group of women to do this a little study together and reading things out loud. Faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word. If you're reading things, you tend to retain it so much better. Just like when we're writing, we read what we read out loud, like, oh, it better. So let's see. I want to make sure we cover your other book too. This is your brand new book coming out on November 1st. So, but you have another book which is Praying with Jane, 31 Days Through the Prayers of Jane Austen. So tell us a little bit about that one as well, because I'm sure that our listeners would like to have both of them.
Yeah, so Praying with Jane is a 31-day devotional, and it goes through Jane Austen's prayers. And there's a devotional pretty much per line of her prayers. So she wrote 3 prayers. Some people have never heard of that. Some people are familiar, but there hasn't been a lot done with them. They've been published like in small volumes at the ends of her books and things like that. But the prayers were written separately from her books. They were in her private collection. And there were 3 prayers that she wrote, and they were, we believe, were meant for evening prayer with her family. And so they're very similar to the types of prayers she would have grown up praying with her family, as the Austen family did pray together morning and evening. But those prayers are very similar to the prayers she would have known from the Book of Common Prayer. And so there are 3 pretty lengthy prayers, very beautifully written, as only Jane Austen could. And each line is just packed with beauty and richness and faith and so much goodness. So I took one line of her prayers per day and broke those down. And the devotional, for those who love Jane Austen or those who just love, classic literature or prayer, the devotions, I took bits and pieces from her books, from her letters, from the memoirs that were written, all of that, and take lessons from each line of prayer and look at, her life and look at how to apply that to our lives. Again, there's key scripture verses each day, and there's also a sample prayer, because the idea is let's start with Jane's prayers, but then let's use that as a springboard for our own prayer time.
And I think a lot of fans of Jane Austen are not even aware of the prayerful aspect at all in the books. I mean, you certainly don't see it in the films, but
right.
there's a richness there, and I think it's wonderful that you are bringing that out. I think that fans are gonna love that book as well. And well, gosh, you've written these 2. What is next? What's coming after that?
Well, I definitely have a few more ideas in mind for devotional books, perhaps on other, favorite classics or other authors who have a life of faith or prayer. It just seems to be kind of my thing at this point. It's one of those things that, as you said in the opening, I teach English. I've been kind of reader writer in that world my whole life and just love classic literature. And so for years I was always writing or speaking about literature in secular context. And then, on the other part of my life, I'm at Bible study at church and helping lead and do all that kind of stuff. And every once in a while I would think, I wonder why the Lord has me, speaking at Jane Austen conferences over here that has nothing to do with faith. And then over here, I'm doing Bible study and kind of wish I could write or talk about faith. And anyway, eventually the Lord brought those 2 together. And so I love that intersection of faith and literature and story. So I definitely have a passion to do more books like that if the opportunity comes.
That's wonderful. I mean, I'm sure we'll all be looking forward to what you come out with next, and I know you will. Let's talk a little bit about how you got started as a writer. Where did that start? I mean, for some of us, it starts in childhood, and we just kind of have this dream. How did it start for you?
Yeah, I really have to say it did start when I was pretty young, and I just loved reading from a very young age, and I grew up in a really book-centric family. My grandmother was a children's author, not super famous or anything, but she had a couple of books published, and kind of more, I guess you'd say, middle grade books and YA. And then my parents were both very literary, and they were teachers, but our house was just filled with books, and I was always reading and writing in school. I remember even like in second grade, my teacher saying, oh, you're such a great writer. I just liked to do it, I guess. And anyway, all through high school and college, I just was so passionate about writing and reading, and all the way, I remember in high school and then all the way through college, I worked at a bookstore in college, but one of the main things I've done almost my whole life, since about middle of high school, I started doing editing projects for people and helping people write things. You know, it could be like in college, I was writing copy for orthodontic, pamphlets and websites, and just any kind of editing or writing job I could get. So I did a lot of freelance work. But after college, I worked in public relations for a few years, and then I've been teaching English and writing for the last 17 years. And so it's been just kind of this natural, slow growing process that reading and writing and all of that has always been a big part of my life. But I would say my start in Christian publishing, that is a whole other story. I mean, that's really God taking all of the pieces and parts of my background and my life and my passions and experiences and bringing it together in his timing. And I would say as a surprise to me, because even though I've always had a passion for writing, and I've always had a passion for writing devotional type things, like on my own little blog that, back in the 2000s, hardly anyone read except my parents or whatever, but I just always had that passion. But I would say it was probably 5 years ago or so that my kids were kind of getting a little older and getting into school, and I was teaching a Bible study, or had been leading Bible studies for several years. And there was a fall that came along, and I remember it was just the Lord telling me to step back from being quite as busy and step back from leading Bible studies. And he started to really plant these seeds of writing for him, just writing as ministry. And I wrote a children's book that the Lord just gave me the story one morning. I woke up, and that kind of started me on my path. I started going to Christian writers conferences and meeting people. And when I was a few years ago, I say probably 4 years ago, I could be getting fuzzy on my math, but a few years ago, I was at one of the large Christian writers conferences here in California called Mount Hermon Christian Writers Conference. Oh, yes. And that, I would say, is probably where a lot of things for me started to just click. I met my literary agent that I now work with there, and I met a lot of authors and editors and encouragers. And really, what happened at that conference is I had this children's book that I'm, trying to talk to people about and get help with and all that. And then everyone would find out that I write about Jane Austen and speak about Jane Austen. And I kept saying, why don't you write a book about Jane Austen's faith? And that's really when it started to come together. And I was sitting there at a meeting with an author, and we were chatting, and she asked that question. And I just said, I leaned forward across the table, I'll never forget. And I said, I've always wanted to write a book about her prayers. And it just kind of popped out at me. And as soon as I said it, I knew that was what I needed to pursue and really take seriously. So, from that point on, I worked really hard to put together some sample devotions. I was working through her prayers kind of as a commentary, and then I realized this is a devotional. And so I started writing it more like a personal devotion. And, so I put that all together, worked really hard for quite a while on that, and put together a proposal, and ended up, sending that off to my now agent, and she loved it and said, we got to send this out. We have to send this out. I think we can find a publisher. So that's kind of how it started. And then after praying with Jane, it was, if I could write one other book, what would it be on? And I knew it was Anna Green Gables. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, wasn't it fun writing a proposal? I have to laugh about that because it's just like, for a writer, it's just pulling your hair out. It's just awful.
Yeah, well, it's a whole different type of writing, and I think it doesn't maybe come as naturally for a lot of us. It's very marketing centric, so it's a nonfiction piece of work, and it's a lot of marketing and a lot of research. And I think for me, what's been great is that I don't mind writing proposals. I actually really enjoy it. I think that might be because I worked in PR, and so I'm so in that marketing mindset that I'm like, well, how would I sell this book? How could we market this book?
Yeah.
What are readers looking for? What are some campaigns or promotions we could do to get people interested? And so I found that sometimes my husband will laugh at me because when I'm drafting some of my devotions and working on an intro for a new book or whatever, I'm often going back and forth between my proposal and my samples because I have all these ideas bouncing back and forth between, oh, that's what this is going to be. Oh, that needs to go in. And, oh, you know what? There's another devotional like this. I need to add that to my comparables. And, I just it kind of builds itself, I guess.
Well, that's an advantage because, I think it's torturous for a lot of writers to have to write in a business way, when you're used to not doing that.
I think so. Oh, yeah. And I tell my English students in college, I tell other writers that I meet, I'm all for getting other people to help us with those things when that's not my thing. Maybe you can write a beautiful story in a week and I could, someone else could write a proposal. So I'm all for, collaboration or getting help. I mean, that's the great thing about these writers conferences too, is you meet people who you can support each other and say, would you read through this proposal? I've been, banging my head against the wall for 3 weeks.
Now, what is your writing process like? Do you always sit in the same spot? Do you just have a certain amount of words you stick to or just kind of go with the flow?
So, well, I am I would say it depends on where I am in the process. So if I'm drafting, that process, you can't really put time limits on it. Of course, I set goals. I'm a pretty goal-oriented person. Have to be pretty scheduled with my writing. It's very hard to find time to write, so I've treated it like a job. I would say that to encourage anybody who's listening who wants to write. Essentially, especially when you're starting out, but even now, a lot of us aren't making, tons of money doing this type of thing. And it's like I'm self-employed, so to speak, as a writer. And so I have to manage my time and I have to treat my writing, whether I'm drafting or I'm actually working on a book that I have a contract for, that is my job. And I have to be really, really scheduled about it. But when you're drafting something and ideas, you can't control that. But right. I would say, like, when I am on deadline, though, I find for me personally, I must have a weekly goal, and I work very hard to meet that goal. And it could be Friday night at 9 p.m. I am at my computer, clattering away because I'm going to meet that deadline because I can't bring this week's work into next week or it'll just start to pile up. So I break it down a few chapters a week or whatever, based on when my deadlines are. If I have a blog post or something like that, I really love to write, try to get it all out, try to draft it and then give it a few days and come back to it if possible. I do work at my laptop most of the time. Like I said, mostly I'm drafting at a computer. Sometimes I'll write some stuff out in a journal, but I would say I move around a lot. I stand, I sit, and one of my best places to work is my car, which people probably think is crazy. But when I need to, and so Praying with Jane, I would say 50% of that was written either in a car, in a coffee shop, or at my husband's office on Saturdays when he was home with our kids. I'd find somewhere quiet. I think I need quiet and no distractions and little interruptions. It really helps. So, and some people are awesome and can just write with chaos around them, but I don't do so well with that. Anna Green Gables, I wrote a lot of that just at home because my kids were in school. And then some of my projects this fall was just promoting the book and doing some blog articles and all of that stuff. I really do. I sometimes will just drive my car and sit under the shade and write for an hour. And then, if I'm picking up kids from school or whatever I'm doing, then I go do that afterward. But it just helps me to focus because otherwise so many other things can distract me when I'm at home.
Yes, I'm like that too. Some writers can sit in a restaurant or coffee shop or whatever, but I'm too distracted. And, I just need peace and quiet so I can concentrate like you. Others can, some writers put music on. But, no. Gosh, we're almost out of time. I can't believe it. What have your Jane Austen fans said about the Jane Austen book? I mean, I'm sure you've introduced that to them, because I can see that they'd be thrilled.
Yeah, well, so I had before COVID and all of that, I was able to take the book and have a book table the last 2 years at the Jane Austen Society of North America annual meeting, and it has about 1,000 attendees. And so I was able to have a book table there, which was amazing. It's such a wonderful group of people, and they have been very supportive. And even though it is a, quote unquote religious book, they've been very supportive. I would say the blogging community in the Jane Austen world, they've all been so supportive of it as well. And I mean, honestly, as a Christian writer, there's times where you go, okay, I'm taking a Christian book into kind of a secular, area. I wasn't sure how it would be received. I did have times where I thought, oh no, I don't know, what will people think? And, of course the enemy wants to strike us with fear, right, when we're trying to do something. But the Lord encouraged me all along the way. And like I said, I've had so many people who are in that Jane Austen world, either with, these bloggers, they're really big blogs, or other, just Jane Austen groups and Jane Austen Facebook pages, just lots of different places. The Jane Austen's House Museum in Chawton in England, they carried it in their bookstore and wanted signed copies. So, I mean, it's been very sweet reception. Yeah, I felt like they gave me a great reception. So that was really sweet.
What about Anne of Green Gables? I don't even know, is there a fan club or something for Anne of Green Gables?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of things, there are a few actual, I would say, more scholarly groups that the Lucy Maud Montgomery Society and Institute and things like that in Canada, and then and they have a conference like every other year. But just as far as fans, I mean, there's Facebook groups and all sorts of different online groups that just are crazy for Anne of Green Gables, and it's worldwide. Yeah. There's such a following. It has been translated into so many different languages, particularly in Japan and other countries where people just love Anne of Green Gables. So it's really neat. And the book, the Anne of Green Gables devotional book, but the devotional book, it's available in a lot of places where people can get it. I'm so glad, because, that's my main thing is you have people in our world today, people all around, we can connect on Instagram and on Facebook, and they say, where can I get this book? So it is available a lot of, Amazon in Canada and bookstores in, UK and in Japan. And so I'm so thankful for that.
I like to say you can find those books wherever fine books are sold.
Yes.
and in brick and mortar stores and also online. So please look for it. Mm-hmm. Tell us how people can connect with you on social media. Yeah, so if you want kind of one hub to find me, you could go to my website. It's racheldodge.com. Pretty easy. RACHEL. And racheldodge.com. If you're on Facebook, you can look for me on there. I have an author page. Just look up Rachel Dodge author. And then on Instagram, you can look for me. The easiest way is to look up Kindred Spirits books. And you could put Rachel Dodge, but on Instagram. And right now I have, a lot going on the next few months. I do giveaways, and I'm doing, Anne Green Gables photo contests and campaigns and all sorts of fun stuff on there. So that's kind of been a place where I've met up with a lot of people. I would say is on Facebook and Instagram. There's a lot of Anne Green Gables fans like to, have read-alongs and chat about books on those two platforms. So look for me there. Well, I hope that readers will connect with you on social media and buy your books. And I just wish you the best of God's blessings in your books, Rachel. And thank you. And it's been a pleasure meeting you and chatting with you. Thanks a lot. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.